Welcome back to the Blend podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ruff. Today we're looking at front of house, so we are of course joined by Emma Lindley of Lindleys Autocentres. Emma's built a proven model to take service advisors from nervous beginners to confident customer-focused leaders, and I'm pleased to say that she's here with us today to talk common mistakes, forward planning and retention ahead of her session at the Blend in Birmingham later this year, titled The Exceptional Service Advisor, What It Takes to Succeed. Emma, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Looking forward to the Blend. It's not too far off now, is it? And your first talk at the Blend too. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, really excited. Really confident with the topic, but first time speaking to a big audience like that. So it'll be a challenge for me, but yeah, I'm really excited.
Well, as you know, it's a supportive community and we're all really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. Ahead of that though, how about getting started with an introduction into how you got into the industry and how your role has evolved over time?
Yeah, so I worked for Lindleys, the family business, so I joined the family company around about 10 years ago. Now, it was never my initial plan to join the family company. I'd always done sales roles previously, but I found myself being made redundant on maternity leave, so I thought the safer bet was to join the family business. So initially started in accounts, seems to be quite a common route in. And then because we were quite small at the time, we were in sort of a busy office where the mobile tie team was also managed from. So over time, I started helping out with that and then ultimately ended up joining that team. Over time, ended up running the mobile tie department and then actually ended up running our first tyre site. That was a really exciting time for me, and that building we actually acquired for that was my granddad's very first garage, well, one of the very first garages he started at Lindley's Autocentres. So it was very full circle for us to get that building back, and to walk in there managing it myself was an absolutely amazing experience. However, that was 2020, March, so it came to a grinding halt quite quickly. And then when I came back into the business after COVID, I actually came back as a service advisor. We had a lot of staff on furlough, so it was sort of everyone muddling in, doing what they can. So I came back as a service advisor, and that's where I really say my career actually started. It really opened my eyes to the power of front of house and how powerful that role actually is. So after I spent a couple of years doing that role, I then progressed into an assistant manager and then managed my own sites as the full Autocentres. So I managed 2 locations at Lindleys over a couple of years. But again, you know, I really saw the success from being a really strong front of house to being then manager workshop. And I really saw some of the great things I did and some of the mistakes that I made and the impacts that I had. So it really put me in a position to kind of see the power of that role, which ultimately ended up me being then put to be customer experience director, where I could then, you know, take a step back and look at all our sites and what they were doing and how each site performed differently and how the staff all performed differently. And that's where I've spent the last 12 months really building a lot of training courses to try and uniform our processes as the company's grown. So anyone who knows about Lindleys, we've grown quite quickly over the past few years and we don't tend to slow that down at all. But that does come with all its own challenges, and the biggest challenge we've faced is to uniform that process and mirror that brand across all our locations. You know, we have some sites which do it really, really well, and then when we acquire a new site with new staff, it's, you know, how do we put that Lindleys stamp on there? How do we progress the staff in a way where they, you know, embody our values? And that's what I've really spent the last 12 months doing. I do speak to a lot of other garage owners, and it's me being in this role has definitely highlighted that there is an absolute need for some long-term front of house training and support. You know, there is the odd courses out there that you can go on, but it's sort of come on the course and away you go to do your job again. And I don't see the role like that. You know, you can't do front of house in a day. So we've kind of broke the front of house role down into 3 key areas that can be developed in that order. And that's what I've spent the last 12 months doing really. So I'm actually going to take a step away from my active role at Lindleys and really throw myself into this training role. So not only can I help Lindleys, but I can help a lot of other independent garages as well.
As you say, Lindleys has seen massive success and rapid growth in recent years. So for any garage owners listening that perhaps operating at a single site and maybe even multi-site, but still feel too busy to take that step back and look at the bigger picture, what advice would you give to them? How can they start that journey to create time to properly focus on front of house and the wider business?
And that is the biggest challenge. The power does lie within the front of house. If you can get your front of house running the workshop without needing the support from you day to day, then that really does free up your time to focus on what you want to focus it on. But, you just need to look what's out there. And this is what's really inspired me to do what I'm going to announce at the Blend, because there definitely is a need for it and a want for it. And I'm really passionate about being a person that can be some ongoing support, some front of house staff. We had a service advisor come from another garage last week and spend some time with us, because that's exactly the situation the business owner was in. She was new to the business. There was him and another technician. Where is he ever going to find the time to support that member of staff? Because as soon as they need help, the first instance is, I'll pick that up, I'll get on with it, it's done. And the learning side of it just gets pushed to a side until there's more time to do that. So I think, finding support around you, or finding other garages, or seeing how they do it, or speak to other business owners definitely helps. But what really helps is maybe spending some time with that front of house outside of the work environment, and really putting some confidence in them. This is what I want. This is where I see you in the future. This is what I want you to do. I want to give you autonomy to do that. What do you then need from me? And I think that's the conversation that sometimes doesn't get had, because there's so much other things going on. I think the front of house, particularly when they're coming into a business, they don't know how much they can impact, or they don't want to overstep the mark, or is workshop efficiency actually their problem? Is the parts profitability actually their problem? And, I see all of them things are, and if you instill them with the confidence to do that and the autonomy to do it, you'll be surprised what actually comes out of staff, I think.
What's less of a surprise, of course, is the subject you'll be covering during your session at the Blend in October. So tell us more about the themes you'll be covering.
Yeah, absolutely. So the presentation itself is called How to Run a Business That Runs Without You. Now, I'm absolutely not going to tell someone how to run their own business, but what I want people to believe is you have the people within your business to allow you to do that if they are managed and trained correctly. So when I first became Customer Experience Director, we took a real step back, and I looked at a lot of our onboarding journey. Do we overwhelm our staff straight away with all the things that can seem really overwhelming to a front of house to begin with, repairs, diagnostic bookings, but we can scale it right back. Do they truly understand what your business requirements are? So what type of bookings you can take, what ability your technicians are, what sort of ramps you have, because what's right for my business will be very different to the garage next door, and very different to all the other garages in the room. So what we actually got our front of house to do was, and particularly this is how it also is at Lindley. So we might have 12 locations, but what works for one location generally won't work for another one. The abilities and skill sets are all very different. And it's really important that the front of house understand that, because they can take a booking at one garage and it go really smoothly, and they could take that same booking at another site and the ability just maybe isn't quite there, or they've not managed the customer's expectations correctly. So that's the fundamental step one of understanding your front of house. And then we break it down into a further 5 steps. So the next step of that is the customer experience. So this is, do your front of house fully understand the customer journey? So that's from the point of booking, what that actually looks like, right to when that customer received the review request. And when we look at that journey as a whole, there is so many calls to action for that front of house to take. And if they do it right, they can start to work in a proactive state. So that customer experience section is really, really important. And then we move on to things like parts profitability. So, what impact do front of house have on parts? Do they return them efficiently? Do they quote correctly? Do they word repairs in a way that if additional parts are required, they've got the confidence to then go back and communicate that to a customer? So there is no loss margin in that job. So parts is a really big one. But then it does get quite exciting towards the end. So as the service advisor understands their business, they understand the customer journey, they then understand parts. The 2 big next key stages to that are becoming a sales champion. Sales can sometimes be a dirty word in our industry, but I see sales as meeting a customer's needs. We're never selling anything that the customer doesn't need, but it's for our job to find out what they actually do need, what's a priority to them. If they're doing really long mileage and they're going on holiday next week, is delivering proactive maintenance to them is actually really important, and that's a sale which the customer absolutely needs. So being able to identify those opportunities is something we look really closely at. And then the last one is workshop efficiency. So this is where the front of house really start to come into their own, and the service advisors actually start to think about the job once it's in the workshop. They're not just thinking about the customer and meeting the customer's needs. We've also got to put this pivotal hat on where we're meeting the customer's needs and we're meeting the workshop's needs. And there's so much we can do on that front of house to speed up that process. I think there is a real naivety sometimes from service advisors who don't come from the technical background. We assume the technicians know it all. The customer asks us to look at a fault. We think, got no idea what that fault means, but the technician will know, so I'll just book it in for that. But, I've learned from transitioning from service advisor to workshop controller, technicians don't know everything, and sometimes they do need a lot of information off the customer to help their diagnosis. They may get there in the end, but what we want them to do is get there quickly and efficiently and be really transparent to the customer. And that is managed by the front of house. That's not necessarily always managed by the workshop. So we've broke this down into 6 real clear steps. Now, when we ran this training through Lindley's, it's been really successful, and following the journey in this way allows the advisors to build confidence in a way where they're then ready for the next step. So then we thought, this is actually great. This is going to be a game changer for Lindley's, and the more garages I speak to in the community, it just highlighted a real need for that. So as my passion in training sort of grown, this is where I want to step away from Lindley's and launch Service Advisor Academy, which will be a 12-month-long academy with these 6 individual training modules. Now, the staff will come on a in-person training every 2 months, but there will be ongoing support in between that. So there'll be training videos on an online portal they can view. There'll be worksheets and workshops actually on the academy where they can constantly develop their knowledge throughout the year rather than just going on a course and leaving. And not only that, we'll have sort of, community get-togethers where they can reach out to me for ongoing support. If they've come across a scenario that maybe quite be non-urgent or they want to discuss something after it's happened, they could also reach out to me and discuss, the different ways that could have gone rather than going to their manager who, may not have all the answers for them. They may not see the front of house the same way that a front of house person does. So they'll have this ongoing support for the academy for that full 12 months, and then they can remain a part of that community forever through their career. Then they can stay part of that.
We'll get back to the academy later because that is exciting, but for now I just wanted to take us back to 2020 when you said that your career really started and when you found that passion for front of house and what it can do for garage businesses. I wanted to ask, where would Lindley's be today if you didn't at that point realise the potential of that front of house role?
I would like to say we'd be close to where we are now, but I do genuinely believe that when in 2020, Garage Hive was fairly in its infancy with Lindley's at that point. We weren't doing mountains with vehicle inspections. I remember stepping on that counter the first day and looking at an MOT failure thinking, I've got no idea what I'm looking at. I'm looking at emissions failures, and I very quickly thought, I panicked initially thinking, you need to be super technical, and you actually don't. And I very quickly realised the information I needed to know and the information the customers needed to know. And, I'd go to work one day and I'd ring my dad up at the end of the day and I'd say, I've had an absolutely great day. And he'd say, when you're there tomorrow, why don't you try looking at the customer's history and seeing what's due and just seeing if you can prompt them on that. And I remember the first thing he actually challenged me with was pollen filters. You said, we never ever sell them. We never sell them, but it's an absolute need for it. It's approaching summer. We're going to be doing air cons. It's an absolute, a great addition to that service for the customer. And I think I went to work that day and sold like 12 pollen filters. And I come home over the moon. And I think slowly over time, me and my dad sort of had, not like a cat and mouse game, but I think he knew strategically what he saw the potential of the front of house. And he definitely saw that in me. And, having a father-daughter relationship, he could challenge me on those things in a way where I've always been super competitive, and I've always done sports and things when I was younger, so I always have this passion to sort of win in a sense. So set with a challenge, I'm that sort of person who definitely throws themselves into it. And we went through a couple of years of me doing this role, me and my dad doing this, and we got to a point where it was like, right, let's copy and paste this now. So then I had an apprentice come and work with me, and that was the first time that I'd really trained someone, an apprentice outside of school. And she was incredible, the journey we took her on just made me feel great at my job. And she ended up becoming an assistant manager at nearly 20 years old at one of our sites. And it was just incredible to see the journey she went on. And we've sort of done that slowly as time's gone on. We spend time with staff, or I'll go to another site and work there front of house with them, get them up to a level, put the processes in place. And then now we're in a point where we're really comfortable that when we acquire a new site, we can just drop the process in there and they sort of hit the ground running. So, it might have come with these challenges if I'd not entered that role at its time, but I don't doubt we would have got there in the end, no matter what. But I definitely think this has helped definitely categorise the front of house role, and I've definitely been a driver within the business for that. I'm definitely the most passionate within Lindleys about that front of house role, and a lot of our advisors do see me as that. They'll come to me for a lot of advice with scenarios that they come across. So yeah, we would have got there, but I like to think that we have got there in a much more efficient and scalable way now.
Lovely to hear about that father-daughter relationship there. Seems to really help spur things along for you. When it comes to finding the right person for your front of house, I'm interested to know what separates a good service advisor from an exceptional one.
To live in a proactive mindset is the real big game changer for me, and I see this all the time. We actually redid our company values at the start of the year at Lindleys, and being proactive was one of the values that I put forward, and you will hear me speak about it a lot in my training. When I look at more of a traditional service advisor role, let's say, they work in a very reactive state. They're answering the phones all the time. The customer's in front of them. The technicians want them. It's all cylinders firing at the same time, and they're very much reacting. But I'm very passionate about living in the mindset of like 60% today and 40% tomorrow, because we can do so much to get ahead of the game. And that's what really sets aside an advisor for me. So particularly when we're interviewing or looking for someone, organisation is a big key in that. When I see service advisors' performance maybe not where we want it to be, a lot of it's down to how organised they are and how organised they get for tomorrow. So I think one of the questions we talk about later is spotting opportunities. That's when it really comes into its own. You need to give yourself the time to do that. So, we kind of want a calm character, a friendly character, but someone that's definitely proactive and organised. And some people might disagree with this, but that's generally why I sometimes prefer a female in that role. Don't get me wrong, males do it really, really well. They can do it well, but I feel like some of the soft skills that are required from front of house tend to come naturally to women a little bit more than they do to men. So yeah, that's what sets advisors apart for me. And just while we're on the topic, I actually interviewed someone a couple of months ago for a senior service advisor role. Now, they weren't from a technical background, and I'd not had a great day that day, and I went into the interview, not with massively high hopes. And when I left that interview, I left in such a good mood. That person I spoke to, I walked in there just having an average day, and I left that room so happy, the smile on her face, the warming energy that she gave me, and I thought, I can employ you on that basis. If you make our customers feel like this, where they come into a real anxious situation, where they're bringing their car into a garage, and you can make them leave happy and full of confidence, sometimes that's all you need in the role, really, is just to make a customer feel heard, feel relaxed, and just reduce that anxiety. And that person did that for me for interview, and we recruited her.
It sounds like it's more about finding the character for the role, and the rest can perhaps be taught.
If you get all your processes right, they're really easy to teach. A process is really easy to follow. And if you get all your processes in place and the advisors know what processes need to be followed, that's when their character really shines through, because everyone can follow a process. It's those soft skills in your character which is really going to set you aside.
I wanted to ask about those opportunities you mentioned there. What opportunities should we be looking for?
Okay, so one of the first things our front of house will do every day when they get in is look at all the jobs for tomorrow and the vehicle inspections. So they will check things like when the last service was, is there timing belt due, is there any service supplements that are coming up due? If that vehicle was booked in for a free health check tomorrow, what were the previous MOT advisories? Did we sell them? Does that customer come to us all the time? If that customer's brakes are grinding and they were advised on the MOT 6 months ago for low disc and pads, why don't we order them parts and get them here? Because we can kind of anticipate where that's going to go. Now, those sort of things come with very slight risk. But if you can imagine ringing a customer up, we've found the problem, your discs and pads are getting very close metal to metal, but we did see this as a previous advisory and we have got the parts here ready for us. Would you like us to go ahead? They're the sort of opportunities I'm looking for our advisors to spot. When this doesn't go right, what it looks like is the technician gets a car on his ramp, it's booked in for a health check. There's no information on there. Technician takes it on a short road test, doesn't find anything wrong with the car. Comes back to us, there's nothing wrong with the car. We then ring the advisor and they say, well, actually, what it was my clutch was slipping when I'm driving it up a hill, and I do get a knock over speed bump sometimes. Now, the technician not having that knowledge hasn't looked for those things to spot that opportunity. So sometimes it's missed. And it's one of the things I speak about a lot of our advisors is sort of diagnostic curiosity. Have you ever? Do you ever? Not to necessarily plant a seed with a customer, but just to get them thinking in the mindset you're thinking of. So if they're in for a health check and they've got a noise on the car and, you might say, when did you last get your car serviced? Was there any advisories on your MOT? There are all these sort of things where a good advisor, a proactive advisor will ask the right questions and think there's an opportunity there, there's an opportunity there, there's a need for the customer. Even if they're in for service, God, it's baking hot outside today. When was the last time you had your aircon regassed? How's that been for you recently? Putting a seed in a customer's mind that we can then act on later also builds confidence with the customer, but also sets yourself up. You don't have to ring a customer with something they don't expect. You've sort of managed that from the beginning, and these are all setting yourself up opportunities. But yeah, a real big one is looking at customer history and what we can put on an inspection for a technician. So at Lindley's, every job has a vehicle inspection, and that's specific to that type of booking. So if we can get as much information on that before it hits the technician, that's only going to speed them up, and also it helps us anticipate where the day is going to go. If I've got 4 services booked in tomorrow and 3 of them are due a timing belt, and I've got 4 health checks and 1 failed MOT last week, but they've not had repairs done, it helps me anticipate what that day is going to look like. Not only what opportunities are there to be had, but also if there's too much to be had, do we need to manage that from the customer expectation in the morning? And these are all opportunities for sales, but also opportunities for great service and opportunities for customer retention. Is that customer on a service plan? Do we need to educate them on their service? There is just so much opportunity. I really could speak about it forever, but I hope that's given a bit of an impression of what I sort of mean by that.
Definitely, really helpful examples there. Now, you mentioned before about the assumption that vehicle technicians will know everything about a fault as being a common mistake in front of house. Are there any other mistakes you see happening?
Some of the mistakes I see them make is just not truly sometimes valuing a technician's time enough. Perfect example, I saw this the other day. Technician's been on a diagnostic job for 4 hours. Customer comes in for a bulb. Front of house wants to pull that tech off to fit that bulb. Is that the right thing for the customer? Is that the right thing for the workshop? It's definitely not the right thing for the workshop, but you're trying to do right by the customer. And these things, not taking assumptions, asking your workshop controller as much as possible, and having common briefs and debriefs. Some of our sites do this really well and some don't do it at all, which is, what I'd love to see is a front of house team with the technicians for 5 minutes in the morning touching base on the work coming in that day. Technician has the opportunity to ask any questions. Do we brief our technicians on all the jobs coming in that day? Can them technicians offer any insights into what questions they might want to be asked? But another one I see quite often with the front of house staff is not really understanding the true ability of a technician. How does that work actually work through the workshop? We can't stack one technician out with all the work. So we need to book accordingly to that. We want spanners to be turning all day, so we want all the technicians to be working all the time, and we need to find work that's going to suit all those technicians. And I think sometimes even business owners overlook that a little bit. You know, when a customer's desperate to get booked in, or there isn't that much work in the diary, and you start taking on bookings that you sometimes probably wouldn't, or you just say, you know, drop it down, we'll take a look because we can, because we've got that time. Then all of a sudden you sell work on another job and you haven't got that time and you've not managed that customer's expectations. So getting the right process, sticking to the process, getting the technicians involved and getting your front of house to understand technicians. I think that's something all workshops can do, which don't take much work, which would definitely help improve the morale in the community, the workshop. Sometimes I see it where you can get a divide where it's like front vs back, and there can be a bit of tension there. And when that happens, it can be quite hard to get back on track. So as a business owner or a workshop controller, making everyone feel part as that team. You know, I think a common one, what we hear all the time is productive and non-productive members as staff. You know, that's really, really insulting to the front of house because they're so productive. You know, they're absolutely relied on to keep those technicians going. So getting the technicians to appreciate that as well, and understanding what the front of house might need from them is definitely something the business owners can do to try and uniform both front and back. You'll only see a positive impact from that.
You've said you'll be talking about forward planning at the Blend. What do you mean by that?
So I've spent a lot of time this year on customer retention. You know, people may have seen a lot on socials. I've been working quite closely with Service Split in terms of getting our customers to see the benefit in our business and understanding that we want to look after them. But also planning forward in terms of future repairs. That's something I don't see enough at all. So garages will have millions and millions of pounds of identified work come through their workshops all the time that either doesn't get communicated or doesn't get followed up. And they are real big missed opportunities. So a lot of the work we do with our front of house is how do we keep our customers on a journey that remains with us? And a lot of that is, you know, we don't want to sell them all the work today. We really want to look after our customers and we want to prioritise the maintenance that we need, but we also want to educate them on the maintenance that's coming up. And if we can do that during the visit, when we're calling them for a reminder at a later date or sending them the reminder, that makes it much easier and we can start to predict and report on the work that's coming back in. But service plans is definitely a big of our plans moving forward. I think as the dealerships become more aggressive with EV vehicles and wanting to retain their customers, we've definitely got to take action now in retaining our customers. You know, we work so hard to acquire them and sometimes we pay to acquire them through things like Google and we're giving them a great service. So it really is our duty of care for the business to not let that customer leave. So, you know, what's our responsibility to make that customer want to come back to us and trust us enough to take our advice and sign up to a service plan and truly believe that we're the garage that's going to look after them long term. That's definitely what we're working on now in terms of how we plan forward for what our business is going to look like in the future.
How far into the future are we talking here? Obviously, the data forecast shows a massive decline in diesel, growth in EV. So how does that affect your planning?
From a front of house perspective, we need to be not too overwhelmed by all these changes. You know, we don't need to know all the technical ins and outs of everything that's been advanced for our garage. But what we do need to know is what we can take on, what the techs need and what the customer needs. So just like technicians have technical training for EV vehicles and ADAS and all these newer developments coming out, we should see front of house the same. You know, there is no point training a technician on ADAS and EV if when a customer contacts your front of house, they don't know the process or they don't know what the next steps are or they don't know what the technician's requirements are. I think we really need to treat front of house the same in that aspect because it doesn't matter how technical your workshop is. If your front of house can't communicate that value, there really isn't much point in that. You know, you will get some bookings out of it, but to actually build a long-standing business model around these future technologies, it's just as important that your front of house understand that it is that your technicians know how to work on them vehicles. So I think also planning forward, it's really important that as we schedule our technicians to develop, we also schedule our front of house to develop in the same way.
ADAS is a really interesting one because there's nothing in place to say that your customers, as an independent garage business, have to have their ADAS calibrated. So I'm interested to know, how do you, Emma, as front of house, sell that service to your customers?
That's a really difficult one. And, I went to the LKQ Academy not long ago and we saw all their ADAS equipment and training that they're doing there. And I had a really long chat with the guy about that. And, my biggest concerns is that unless it becomes a legislation, it's really, really hard to transfer that value to a customer. Because in their mind, they may read online or have conversations that, they can just drive out the garage without this service. So we're still in that transitional period at the moment. I'll be honest with you, Lindleys don't do ADAS at the minute. I think the big concern is the cost behind the equipment, the cost behind the training, and are the front of house going to be able to deliver that value to the customer when there's no actual legislations in place that are sort of enforcing this. So at the moment, we're sort of biding our time to see what happens. And I do see ADAS at the moment being sold more by the body shops just because they're doing those kind of repairs. And I feel like if the customer's coming in for that kind of repair, you can really sell it to the customer in a way that really adds value and it makes clear sense to a customer. When a customer's coming to us for a lower arm and we've upset the geometry, it's really difficult to then sell that to the customer because they could go and have that lower arm at another garage who isn't even going to mention that word to them. So I think, for us working in the community, it's really important that we keep speaking about it. We keep speaking about the need for legislation because I think that's the only thing that's going to really empower us to be able to do that. And I think that's what will be the next steps. But yeah, we're absolutely in that situation at the moment where do we, don't we? What do we need to do to get there? How are we going to get the front of house to transfer this value in a way that the customer is going to be happy for us to go ahead with the repair that they may not have anticipated.
Yeah, we've been waiting for ADAS to be integrated into the MOT for many years now. And you're absolutely right. That's what's needed to make that sale easier to vehicle owners. But I guess we're just going to have to wait and see how that one plays out. What about general advice for front of house? What could anyone listening change immediately, relatively quickly, having listened to this podcast?
I think we do really need to understand the actual anxiety that comes with customers coming to our garage. Customers' expectations are exceeding everywhere. Everybody's in a rush. Everybody wants it done today. Everyone's tight on cash. It feels like quite a struggle for customers sometimes at the moment. And I think it's for us, as advisors, to really appreciate we've got to act with empathy sometimes with these customers. Not necessarily sympathy, but we definitely need to have empathy and really understand the shoes the customer's in. I think we can get in such a mindset where we do the job day in, day out. We see cars come in, day out, 20 cars a day, and we really don't appreciate the anxiety that customer is actually going through. Whether that's anxiety about not having the car, anxiety about cost, anxiety about just waiting for an update. That's something I have to remind our advisors about all the time. And if we can get this culture where we're working in this proactive state all the time and we're revolving it around the customer's journey, we pretty much hit the spot with that. And I think garage owners really need to look at their customer journey, make sure the front of house actually understand their customer journey. Do they know what it looks like for a customer to book a service online? Is the pricing transparent? Do they know what the customer's feedback experience is like? Or what are they responsible for? Can they impact that? I think that's a real good starting point that sometimes can be a real assumption, and front of house is sometimes afraid to ask because what they don't know, they generally don't know. And I think that's a real good starting point, is as the needs of the customer get harder, our front of house have only got to get stronger, and understanding every point of that journey really helps with that.
You've already shared a couple of examples of service advisors and apprentices that you've worked with, but I wanted to ask, is there an example that you can share of, say, someone that's gone from mediocre average to exceptional, having worked alongside yourself?
Yeah, so particularly that one advisor I spoke about earlier who came to us as an apprentice. Now, she didn't come to me directly as the apprentice. The backstory to that was she worked at one of our other locations. She'd worked there about a year. She was going through her college. Be it the type of work that was at that garage or the culture or whatever it was at that time, it wasn't working out. She wasn't getting on with the managers. I think that relationship started to break down and her engagement just started to diminish from that point. So when she actually arrived with me, it was a bit more of a last chance saloon, to be honest. It was a bit like, right, we're going to send you to Emma to go and work at our busy service site. She'll do some training with you and we'll see how you get on, because it wasn't working where she was at. This was probably one of my very first proper training experiences, and I admit I was in the frame of mind where I was thinking, oh, it's not worked out somewhere else. This is going to be a bit of a hard slog. But I thought, we'll go at it with a total clean slate. I'm not going to do any prejudgments. This workshop's different to them. All the people are different. Let's just sort of start again. And we did that. And I saw this advisor, Amy's her name, so we'll just call her that. And she came to me as she was super nervous and quiet and timid, but she always had a real strong passion about cars, and this is what always stood out to her. I'd hear her have a conversation with a technician, and I'd be like, God, you know more than I do, and God, there really is this passion there. Sort of what's sort of gone wrong, and and this is when we started to scale it right back and actually put process in place, because I think particularly for a young person, and particularly for a young girl, working that front of house can be so daunting. Some customers are absolutely lovely and you want to see them every day, but some customers do look straight through you. At 18 years old, a young girl, they look right through you, and it does take an element of, really building a thick skin with that. But not only just getting a thick skin, actually building yourself a toolkit that tackles these problems. So when a customer does face you with a bit of disrespect, or they want to speak to somebody else, do you have that confidence to then sort of manage that customer? And we work through a lot of this with Amy, and building her confidence up on the phone and building her confidence up with customers, and just working alongside her every day. She just flourished and flourished and flourished to a point then where I thought, actually, I can go and work at another garage now and help them out. So then I'd start doing bits of that, and I'd be in and out. And then the workshop manager at that time said, I want Amy as my assistant manager. She had the passion, her technical knowledge was there, she generally loved cars, she did understand the mechanical side of things, but I think her anxiety come with the confidence. And whereas that maybe wasn't being instilled with her before, what I do believe I'm really good at is, being a real cheerleader for a member of staff. I always look on the bright side of things with front of house, and I'm a very uplifting character in terms of, you can absolutely do this, and giving people the opportunities to, maybe reach a bit further than they normally would. And if that means make a mistake, it means make a mistake, but we'll absolutely learn from that. But if they don't, then each time they stretch themselves, that's the new limit that they grow to. And then all of a sudden the confidence is just there, and, I'm not needed. And, we built such a good relationship with Amy. And like I said, she grew to be an assistant manager with us. And to the point where, she turned up at my parents' house on Christmas Eve and bought me and my partner a Christmas present, and just for the year that we've spent together. And that is what really set me off on my training journey. And she knows that, we still have a really great relationship. And she's on maternity leave at the moment now, because this was a few years ago, and we can't wait for her to come back and see what the next steps of her career end up being. I've got no doubt she's going to be great, but that's one of my real success stories. I always look back on that time and think she taught me more than I ever taught her in that. And when I'm teaching people, I always look back at that time. And yeah, really proud of where she's come. And I just love working with front of house staff now. I love seeing the confidence thrive within them. And I think sometimes, particularly business owners that are workshop controllers, they don't have that necessarily soft side that coaching needs sometimes. When people are particularly feeling down or they're doubting themselves, I think it does take a little bit of nurturing, which sometimes doesn't come naturally to business owners. It's definitely more of a coaching scenario. So yeah, that's been one of my real success stories that I do anchor on quite a lot when I'm doing sort of self-reflection or looking at other people. That particular story is one that always stands out to me.
What a journey from Last Chance Saloon to what she's achieved now. Brilliant to hear. Just to finish up then, if attendees could take just one thing from your session at the Blend, what would you hope that would be?
I hope they come to my session initially being inquisitive about the front of house role. Like I said, I think there's so much conversation about it now, but what I hope they take away from it is the structure is there. It's proved and tested. The support's going to be there. They can empower their front of house to be the person that they want to be. And even if they're not there right now, they can absolutely get there. And this is why I'm really excited to launch the Academy, because I just can't wait to see what engagement that has and what interest it sparks from that. But I feel like we've got a real proved, tried and tested theory of clear steps your advisor can go on that will develop them into the advisor that you need them to be. And not always jumping to the end game, not getting bogged down by maybe thinking, oh, they're making the mistakes, they're slowing the workshop down, taking them on an actual journey where it's going to be consistent progression and it is absolutely achievable. You know, you don't need these dealership, super technical, high level, super high salaried people to come and do this job. You can get someone at, you know, apprentice level or really junior level and breed them through the culture of your business to allow you to have a front of house that runs without you. You know, there is the model there, and I'm really excited to, you know, see what people think of that and just give people the confidence that they can do it. And even if it's not my training that they're going to come on, they can take this model away with them and try and apply it to their own business and really break it down with their front of house. So hopefully that's what I take away, that they leave more optimistic and they leave hopeful, and they truly believe that the power is within the front of house, and eventually they will be able to free themselves from what they may see as a burden for them when they're trying to run their business.
When is the launch of the Academy? Does it coincide with the blend?
That coincides with the blend. So, you know, I was in two minds about how much detail to go into it with this talk, but I thought, you know, we're there, we're ready, let's just do it. So it will officially launch at the blend with enrolment dates hopefully starting in January. So we can start 2026. That'll be my fully fledged job role at that point. And then I'll be stepping away from Lindleys and launching the Academy, where that'll become my full-time job. All our front of house staff at Lindleys will then come through this Academy. And the way it is set out, I believe it takes a service advisor from being a junior service advisor to ultimately being able to help with workshop control. So it really goes full circle with that. And that's why we want all our advisors at Lindleys to also go on this, because we really will be able to see and assess where they're at. And not only that, you know, really empower our front of house to lead from the front.
Emma, did I just get a Blend podcast exclusive there?
You did, yes. Yeah.
Brilliant, we'll take it. It's genuinely been really interesting to hear more about your experiences, so thank you again for taking the time out to chat with us today. We look forward to hearing much more from you later this year at The Blend.
No worries, thank you for having me, Mike, it's been great.
That's all for this episode of The Blend Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe on your favourite podcast player so you're always up to date with the latest episode. And if you're already a subscriber, why not recommend us to someone that you think might find this podcast useful, and perhaps even give us a review. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back very soon with another episode. Bye for now.